The massive command bridge of the Zinthri flagship Eternal Dominion hummed with anticipation as Admiral Zek Thor studied the tactical displays before him. 3,000 years had passed since the Great Truce was signed, 3 millennia of peace that had allowed the galaxy's most powerful civilizations to flourish without the constant threat of extinction. Now, as his fleet of 10,000 warships hung in the darkness between stars, he was about to shatter that peace forever. Admiral, his tactical officer, Commander Vashti, approached with reverence that bordered on fear. All fleet commanders report ready. The humans' outer colonies are defenseless, just as our intelligence predicted. Zek Thor's 4 eyes gleamed with satisfaction. The Zinthri had spent centuries preparing for this moment, building their war machine in secret while the other species grew soft and complacent. Their reptilian features twisted into what passed for a smile among his kind. Excellent. And their military response? Minimal, sir. Most human fleets are scattered across their territory on patrol duties. They suspect nothing. Our spies report their governments are more concerned with trade disputes than warfare. The Admiral's laugh was a harsh, guttural sound that sent chills through the bridge crew. Humans, the youngest species in the galactic community, barely 3,000 years since they had achieved faster-than-light travel. They had been nothing more than primitive warriors when the truce was signed, and, apparently, they had learned nothing about real warfare in all that time. "Begin the assault," Zek Thor commanded, his voice carrying the authority of a conqueror. "Target their agricultural worlds first. Let them starve while we decide their fate." Across the bridge, officers moved with practiced efficiency. The Zinthri war machine had been honed over millennia of conquest before the truce. They had subjugated dozens of species, crushed entire civilizations, and now they would remind the galaxy why they were feared. The first target was New Eden, a peaceful farming colony with a population of 12 million humans. The planet's defense consisted of exactly 3 orbital platforms and a handful of patrol ships, laughably inadequate against the 100 Zinthri dreadnoughts dropping out of hyperspace above their world. On the planet's surface, farmers looked up in confusion as massive shadows blotted out their sun. The orbital defense platforms managed to fire exactly 7 shots before being vaporized by concentrated plasma fire. The patrol ships didn't even have time to send a distress signal. "Surface bombardment commencing," reported the weapons officer. "Targeting population centers and infrastructure." Zek Thor watched with cold satisfaction as beams of destructive energy lanced down from his ships, turning cities into glass and forests into ash. This would send a message to the human government on Earth: surrender or watch their colonies burn one by one. But something unexpected happened as the bombardment continued. The communication arrays that should have been the first targets were deliberately left intact, and soon, signals began transmitting from the planet's surface. Zek Thor expected pleas for mercy, desperate calls for help, or perhaps angry threats from the local governor. Instead, the communications officer looked up with confusion written across his scaled features. "Admiral, we're receiving multiple transmissions from the planet. They appear to be laughing." "Laughing?" Zek Thor's voice carried a dangerous edge. "Explain." The officer's hands trembled as he adjusted his controls. "The humans on the surface, sir. They're broadcasting on multiple frequencies, and they seem to find something amusing about our attack." With growing bewilderment, Zek Thor ordered the signals to be put on the main speakers. The bridge filled with the sound of human laughter. Not the desperate hysteria of a doomed population, but genuine amusement. Between the laughter, voices could be heard speaking in the human language, which the Zinthri had long ago learned to understand. "Did you see that shot? Completely missed the grain silos. They're using plasma cannons on mud huts. Do they think we're hiding something valuable in there? Wait. Are they seriously trying to bomb the chicken coops?" The laughter grew louder and more widespread as more human voices joined in. Zek Thor's confusion deepened. This was not how conquered populations were supposed to react. Where was the terror? Where were the cries for mercy? "Admiral," Commander Vashti ventured carefully, "perhaps they don't understand the severity of their situation? Before Zekthor could respond, a new transmission came through, this one from what appeared to be the planet's governor. The human's voice was calm, almost friendly. "Hello there, unknown ships. This is Governor Sarah Chun of New Eden Colony. I'm not sure what you're trying to accomplish with your light show, but you're welcome to continue if it makes you happy. We've got some excellent viewing spots if you'd like to land and watch from the ground. The weather's perfect today, and my wife makes incredible barbecue." The Zenthri Bridge crew exchanged bewildered glances. Zekthor's tactical displays showed millions of tons of ordnance being dropped on the planet, entire city blocks being vaporized, and yet the humans acted as if they were watching a fireworks display. "Increase bombardment intensity," Zekthor growled. "Target their government buildings directly." The weapons officer hesitated. "Sir, our energy output is already at maximum efficiency. We're using enough firepower to crack a moon." "Then crack it." More beams lanced down from orbit, this time focused on the colonial capital. The governor's building, a modest structure that wouldn't have impressed anyone on the Zenthri homeworld, simply vanished in a pillar of superheated plasma. Surely now the humans would understand their situation. Instead, Governor Chen's voice came through again, sounding mildly annoyed. "Well, that was rude. That building was over 50 years old. It had sentimental value." There was a pause, then she continued, "Oh well, we needed to renovate anyway." The plumbing was terrible. More laughter echoed from the surface as other humans chimed in with comments about their destroyed property. They discussed the light show, debated the artistic merits of different explosion patterns, and one group apparently started taking bets on which building would be targeted next. Zekthor stared at his displays in growing alarm. According to every sensor reading, his fleet was conducting a devastating orbital bombardment. The planet's surface was being reshaped by weapons capable of sterilizing worlds. And yet the humans acted like they were at some kind of entertainment event. "Sir," the communications officer called out, his voice strained with confusion. "We're receiving a transmission from Earth. It appears to be their government responding to the attack." Finally, Zekthor muttered, "Put them through. Let's hear their surrender terms." The main screen flickered to life, showing a human male in what appeared to be military dress. His expression was professional, but carried an undertone of amusement that made Zekthor's scales itch with unease. "This is Admiral James Morrison of the United Earth Defense Force. I understand you're having some fun with our colonial territories. We appreciate that you're keeping your activities to the outer colonies for now. Shows good manners. However, I should probably warn you that you're in violation of several galactic treaties, not to mention making a bit of a mess." Zekthor found his voice. "Human, I am Admiral Zekthor of the Zenthri Empire. We are not having fun. We are conducting a military assault on your territories. Surrender immediately or face total annihilation." Admiral Morrison's eyebrows rose slightly. "A military assault? With those weapons?" The human actually chuckled. "I'm sorry, but there must be some misunderstanding. We assumed you were testing some kind of new mining equipment or perhaps conducting archaeological excavations. Those energy outputs barely register on our threat assessment scales." The Zenthri Admiral felt something cold settle in his stomach. "Barely register? We are using enough firepower to destroy continents." "Well," Morrison said thoughtfully, "I suppose if we were still using 30th century technology, that might be concerning. But this is the 40th century, Admiral. Your weapons are, well, they're charmingly retro but hardly threatening." As if to demonstrate his point, Morrison gestured to someone off-screen. The orbital bombardment continued, but now the humans on New Eden began pointing at the sky and applauding as their defensive shields that the Zenthri sensors had somehow failed to detect, became visible as shimmering barriers that absorbed the plasma beams like rainfall. "You see," Morrison continued conversationally, "when you spend 3,000 years at peace, you don't just sit around knitting. You develop technology. Lots of technology. Really, really advanced technology." His smile became slightly predatory. "The kind of technology that makes your current weapons look like firecrackers." Zekthor's tactical officer turned pale as a reptilian could manage. "Admiral, Our sensors are picking up massive energy signatures across the human territories. Ships are appearing out of nowhere. On the tactical display, red dots began materializing throughout human space. Not dozens or hundreds, but thousands upon thousands of ships, each one registering energy outputs that dwarfed the Zinthri dreadnoughts. Admiral Morrison's voice took on a more serious tone. Now, Admiral Zekthor, I'm going to give you exactly one opportunity to withdraw your forces and return to your territory. Consider this a professional courtesy between military officers. You clearly didn't know what you were getting into, and I respect that. You dare threaten the Zinthri Empire? Zekthor snarled, though his voice lacked its earlier confidence. Morrison's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. Admiral, I'm not threatening anyone. I'm trying to save your lives. The human transmission ended, leaving the Zinthri bridge in stunned silence. Around them, the tactical displays showed an impossible sight. Human ships materializing throughout the galaxy as if they had been hiding in plain sight. Each ship radiated more power than an entire Zinthri battle group. On New Eden's surface, the humans had apparently organized some kind of celebration. Governor Chin's voice came through the communicators again, now addressing the Zinthri fleet directly. Listen, you seem like nice folks if a bit misguided. Why don't you come down and join the party? We're having a barbecue to celebrate the Pretty Lights show, and there's plenty of food. My husband makes this amazing potato salad that you absolutely have to try. Zekthor stared at the communications console, as if it had personally insulted his ancestors. 3,000 years of preparation, the greatest war fleet in Zinthri history, weapons capable of cracking planets, and the humans wanted to invite them to a barbecue. Admiral, Commander Vashti whispered, "What are your orders?" For the first time in his long military career, Admiral Zekthor had absolutely no idea what to do next. The humans weren't acting like any enemy he had ever faced. They weren't acting like any species he had ever encountered. They were treating his devastating assault like a minor inconvenience, his threats like friendly suggestions, and his entire fleet like tourists who had gotten lost. And, judging by the energy readings now filling his sensors, they had every reason to feel confident about their position. The 3,000-year truce was indeed shattered, but not at all in the way Zekthor had planned. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened within hours of the first reports reaching the core worlds. Representatives from 57 different species materialized in the great amphitheater on Nexus Prime, their holographic forms shimmering with urgency and barely controlled panic. The air itself seemed to vibrate with tension as delegates whispered frantically among themselves. At the center of the assembly, High Coordinator Meltak of the Zephyrian Concordat called for order with her melodious voice, though even her usually calm demeanor showed cracks of strain. The Zephyrians had been instrumental in negotiating the original truce, and news of its violation struck them like a physical blow. Fellow beings, Meltak announced, her crystalline features reflecting the ambient light of the chamber. We have received disturbing reports from the Outer Rim. The Zinthri Empire has launched what appears to be a coordinated assault on human colonial territories. A wave of shocked murmurs swept through the assembly. Ambassador Thorik of the Caesarian Trade Union, his massive form dominating his section of the amphitheater, leaned forward with disbelief written across his craggy features. Impossible. The Zinthri signed the truce. They have honored it for 3 millennia. The evidence is undeniable, Meltak continued, activating the central holographic display. Images of Zinthri war fleets appeared above the assembly. Massive vessels bristling with weapons, surrounding human colonies like predators circling wounded prey. Long-range sensors have confirmed at least 10,000 Zinthri warships operating in human space. Ambassador Veltar of the Andromedian Collective, her gaseous form shifting colors with agitation, spoke through her translation matrix. This is catastrophic. If one species can break the truce with impunity, what prevents others from following suit? The galaxy will return to the dark ages of constant warfare. The concern was valid, and every delegate knew it. Before the Great Truce, the galaxy had been locked in cycles of violence that claimed billions of lives and destroyed entire star systems. The peace had allowed unprecedented technological advancement, cultural exchange, and prosperity across all species. What is the human response? Asked Representative Kixlor of the Silicon Confederation, his mechanical voice cutting through the growing chatter. Their military capabilities were modest when the truce was signed. Meltak's expression grew puzzled as she consulted her data tablets. This is where the situation becomes unusual. We have intercepted several human transmissions from the affected colonies. Rather than panic or calls for military assistance, the colonists appear to be celebrating. A silence fell over the assembly that was somehow more disturbing than the previous chaos. Ambassador Thoric's voice carried a note of confusion that echoed through the chamber. Celebrating? Their colonies are under bombardment. Furthermore, Meltak continued, her voice growing more strained, we have detected massive energy signatures throughout human territory. Ships appearing from what our sensors initially read as empty space. The number of vessels is unprecedented. The holographic display shifted, showing tactical readouts from Galactic Council monitoring stations. Red dots representing human ships began appearing across the map in numbers that made the assembled delegates lean back in their seats. Where there had been dozens of human patrol vessels, there were now thousands upon thousands of warships, each one registering energy outputs that dwarfed anything in the Council's databases. Ambassador Krivok of the Hegemony spoke for the first time, her insectoid features clicking with agitation. These readings must be in error. No species could maintain such a fleet without our knowledge. The readings have been verified by multiple independent sources, Meltak replied grimly. Whatever the humans have been developing during the truce period, they have kept it entirely hidden from galactic intelligence networks. In the VIP observation section, a figure that few delegates had noticed stirred for the first time since the session began. Ambassador Elena Vasquez, the human representative to the Galactic Council, rose gracefully from her seat. Her presence had become so routine over the decades that most aliens barely registered her attendance anymore. Humans were considered one of the newer and less significant species in galactic politics. Honored Coordinator, Elena said, her voice carrying easily through the chamber despite her species' apparently modest stature. Might I address the assembly? All eyes turned to her, and for the first time, many delegates noticed something unsettling about the human representative. While her manner was polite and her expression serene, there was something in her eyes that suggested depths they had never bothered to explore. She carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who knew secrets that others could not even imagine. Of course, Ambassador Vasquez, Meltak replied, though her tone suggested she wasn't sure she wanted to hear what the human had to say. Elena stepped into the central speaking area, seemingly unbothered by the attention of dozens of species, many of which could have physically overwhelmed her without effort. Thank you. I feel I should clarify a few misconceptions that appear to be circulating regarding the current situation. She gestured toward the tactical display, where Zenthri ships continued their assault on human colonies. First, I want to assure the Assembly that no human colonies are in any actual danger. The Zenthri assault, while certainly a violation of the truce, poses no meaningful threat to human settlements or population. Ambassador Thoric's confusion was evident in his voice. No threat? We can see the bombardment occurring on our sensors. Elena's smile was gentle, but somehow unsettling. Indeed, you can observe Admiral Zek Thor's fleet conducting what they believe to be an effective military assault. However, what you're seeing is the equivalent of throwing pebbles at a mountain and expecting it to crumble. The assembly erupted in confused chatter as delegates tried to process this statement. Representative Kixlor's mechanical voice cut through the noise. Explain. Your colonies show impact signatures consistent with planetary bombardment weapons. They do indeed, Elena agreed pleasantly. The Zenthri are using impressive weapons by 30th century standards. Unfortunately for them, This is the 40th century. She touched a control on her personal device, and the holographic display shifted to show detailed scans of New Eden Colony. What had appeared to be a defenseless agricultural world now revealed itself to be protected by energy shields of staggering complexity, barriers that absorbed the Zenthri bombardment without any visible strain. During the 3,000 years of peace, Elena continued, her voice taking on an educational tone, humanity did not simply rest on our laurels. We developed technology. We explored new sciences. We pushed the boundaries of what was thought possible. Her smile widened slightly. We also prepared for the possibility that someone might eventually decide the truce was no longer convenient. Ambassador Veltar's gaseous form shifted through several colors before settling on a concerned purple. You knew this was coming. Not specifically, Elena replied honestly. But we've learned that peace is a wonderful thing that requires constant vigilance to maintain. While our friends in the galaxy focused on trade and cultural development, both admirable pursuits, we also invested heavily in ensuring our ability to protect that peace. The tactical display updated again, showing the true scope of the human response to the Zenthri assault. Ships materialized throughout human space, but now the display revealed something even more startling. Similar vessels appearing near major trade routes around Council worlds and in supposedly neutral territories throughout the galaxy. How many ships do you have? Meltak asked, though her voice suggested she wasn't sure she wanted the answer. Elena consulted her device casually. Active vessels? Currently about 47,000 in this galaxy alone. Of course, that's just the rapid response fleet. If we needed to bring our full military capacity online. She shrugged. Well, let's just say we've been productive during the peace years. The silence that followed this revelation was deafening. Ambassador Krivok was the first to find her voice. 47,000? Our intelligence services estimated your total fleet at fewer than 200 vessels. Yes, your intelligence services, Elena said with polite interest. How are they working out for you? Because from our perspective, galactic intelligence gathering has become rather relaxed over the centuries. Ambassador Thorik leaned forward, his massive frame somehow seeming less imposing than it had moments before. What are your intentions, Ambassador? Your government's response to this aggression? Elena's expression became more serious. Our intentions are exactly what they have always been, to maintain peace and protect innocent life. The Zenthri assault will be stopped, their forces will be contained, and we will determine appropriate consequences for this violation of galactic law. Contained how? Representative Kixlor inquired, his mechanical voice betraying something that might have been nervousness. Before Elena could respond, new alerts began flashing across the Assembly's monitoring systems. The tactical display updated in real time, showing the Zenthri fleet around New Eden suddenly, surrounded by human vessels that seemed to have materialized from nowhere. But these weren't the massive dreadnoughts that the delegates might have expected. They were sleek, elegant ships that radiated power levels that made the Zenthri warships look like toys. As you can observe, Elena said matter-of-factly, Admiral Zek Thor and his forces are now receiving a demonstration of modern defensive technology. No Zenthri personnel will be harmed unless they choose to escalate the situation, but their ability to threaten anyone has been effectively neutralized. The display showed Zenthri weapons firing at the newly arrived human ships, weapons that had been devastating colonies moments before now splashing harmlessly against barriers that seemed to barely register the impact. In response, the human vessels did nothing more threatening than position themselves between the Zenthri fleet and the planet below. Ambassador Veltar's form cycled through several concerning colors. And after? What happens to the Zenthri Empire? Elena's smile returned, though it carried a new edge. That depends entirely on Admiral Zek Thor's willingness to engage in reasonable conversation. We're hoping this can be resolved diplomatically. She paused, though I should mention that our definition of diplomatic resolution has evolved somewhat over the past 3 millennia. High Coordinator Meltak found herself in the unprecedented position of not knowing how to proceed. The situation had evolved beyond anything the Council had protocols to handle. Ambassador, on behalf of the Galactic Council, I must ask, what is humanity's position regarding the continuation of the truce? The truce remains in effect, Elena replied firmly. Humanity honors its commitments. However, we also believe that agreements work best when all parties understand the consequences of violating them. She gestured toward the tactical display. Consider this an educational opportunity for anyone who might have forgotten why peaceful coexistence is preferable to the alternatives. As if summoned by her words, new data streams began flowing into the assembly's systems. Detailed scans of human technology, fleet compositions, and defensive capabilities. The information was clearly being provided voluntarily, but its implications were staggering. Every major space lane, every important system, every council world was under the protective watch of human vessels that had apparently been invisible for centuries. You've been watching us, Ambassador Krivok said, her voice barely above a whisper. We've been protecting you, Elena corrected gently. There's a difference, though I understand the distinction might be subtle from your perspective. The assembly chamber fell into a profound silence as the full implications of humanity's revelation settled over the delegates. The balance of power in the galaxy had shifted so fundamentally that many representatives were struggling to comprehend their new reality. Elena began gathering her materials, preparing to leave. If there are no further questions regarding the current situation, I should return to Earth to brief my government on the Council's response to this crisis. As she moved toward the exit, Ambassador Thoric called out, Ambassador, one more question. During all these centuries of peace, watching over us without our knowledge, developing this incredible technology, why didn't you tell us? Why keep it secret? Elena paused at the threshold, considering the question seriously. Because, Ambassador, peace is a fragile thing. If everyone had known how powerful humanity had become, it might have created fear, resentment, or pressure to join arms races that would have ended the golden age we've all enjoyed. She smiled warmly. We prefer to let you all focus on building better lives for your citizens rather than worrying about military competition. And now? Meltak asked quietly. Now, Elena replied. Everyone knows that the peace we've all cherished as guardians. Whether that knowledge makes the galaxy more secure or less stable remains to be seen. Her expression grew firm. But anyone considering following the Zenthri example should understand that humanity takes our responsibilities seriously. With that, she departed, leaving behind an assembly of delegates who suddenly realized they were living in a very different galaxy than they had imagined just hours before. Admiral Zek Thor stood on his command bridge, staring at tactical displays that made no sense according to everything he had learned about warfare in his 4 centuries of military service. The Zenthri fleet, once the pride of his empire and the terror of enemy civilizations, now hung motionless in space, completely surrounded by human vessels that defied every principle of naval architecture he understood. The human ships were impossible. They moved without visible propulsion, generated energy without detectable power sources, and absorbed his most devastating weapons as if they were gentle rain. More disturbing still, they had arrived without triggering any of his fleet's advanced warning systems. Sensors that could detect a grain of sand from 3-star systems away had somehow failed to notice the approach of thousands of warships. Status report, Zek Thor demanded, though his voice lacked its earlier confidence. Commander Vashti approached with the cautious manner of someone delivering news that might result in immediate execution. Sir, our weapons have had 0 effect on the human vessels. Our plasma cannons, quantum torpedoes, and gravitational disruptors all register direct hits, but their hulls show no damage whatsoever. And our defensive systems? Fully operational, but unnecessary, sir. The human ships haven't fired a single shot. They're just watching us. This was perhaps the most unnerving aspect of the entire situation. In Zek Thor's experience, superior forces demonstrated their dominance through overwhelming displays of firepower. The humans had chosen instead to simply exist in his vicinity, making no threatening moves while simultaneously making it clear that his entire fleet was at their mercy. "Sir," the communications officer called out, his voice cracking slightly, "we're receiving another transmission from the human admiral." Zek Thor had been dreading this moment, but he was still a military officer with 3 centuries of experience. Whatever was happening here, he would face it with the dignity expected of his rank. "Put him through." Admiral Morrison appeared on the main screen, looking remarkably relaxed for someone commanding what appeared to be the most powerful fleet in galactic history. He was seated in what looked more like a comfortable office than a military command center, with a cup of what appeared to be coffee steaming gently at his elbow. "Admiral Zek Thor," Morrison said pleasantly, "I hope you've had time to consider your position. I trust our arrival hasn't caused too much confusion among your crew." The Zenthri admiral struggled to maintain his composure. "Human, your vessels may have superior technology, but the Zenthri Empire will never surrender to an inferior species." Morrison's eyebrows rose slightly, and he took a sip of his coffee before responding. "I'm sorry, but I think there's been a misunderstanding. We're not asking for your surrender." This was not the response Zek Thor had expected. "Then what do you want?" "At the moment, we're mainly interested in making sure you don't hurt anyone while we figure out what to do with you." Morrison leaned back in his chair. "You see, Admiral, your situation is rather unique. You've launched the first military aggression in 3,000 years, violated numerous galactic treaties, and attacked civilian populations. That puts us in uncharted territory. We attacked legitimate military targets." Morrison consulted a tablet that materialized in his hand from seemingly nowhere. "Let's see. You targeted farming communities, civilian infrastructure, and what appears to be a kindergarten. Unless the Zenthri definition of military target has changed significantly since our last diplomatic contact." The accusation stung because it was accurate. The Zenthri strategy had been to target civilian populations first, using terror to force quick surrenders. It was an approach that had served them well in previous conflicts, but hearing it described so clinically made it sound less like brilliant tactics and more like simple brutality. "We are conducting a legitimate conquest according to the laws of war," Zek Thor insisted. But that's where you're mistaken," Morrison replied gently. "You're not conducting a conquest. You're conducting a temper tantrum." His tone remained friendly, but something shifted in his expression. "A temper tantrum with weapons capable of killing millions of innocent people, which makes it our problem." Around the Zenthri flagship, more human vessels materialized, not threatening, but present. Each new ship that appeared was different from the others, suggesting a diversity of design and function that spoke of technological capabilities beyond anything in Zek Thor's experience. "How many ships do you have?" the Admiral found himself asking. Morrison considered the question. "In this immediate area? About 2,000. But you're asking the wrong question, Admiral. What should I be asking? You should be asking why we're being so polite about this situation." The question hung in the air between them, and Zek Thor realized he didn't want to know the answer. But his military training compelled him to ask anyway. "Why are you being so polite?" Morrison's smile became sad rather than friendly. "Because, Admiral, we remember what it was like before the truce. We remember the wars, the suffering, the billions of lives lost to conflicts that solved nothing and changed nothing except who was dead." He set down his coffee cup. "We've spent 3,000 years building a civilization based on the idea that those wars never needed to happen again. And yet you built this fleet," Zek Thor pointed out. "These weapons. We built these ships because we're not naive," Morrison replied. "We hoped the galaxy had learned the same lessons we did, but we prepared for the possibility that someone hadn't." His expression hardened slightly. "We prepared for the possibility that someone would decide that peace was boring, that conquest was more interesting than cooperation, that might made right." The human admiral stood up, and for the first time, Zekthor noticed that Morrison carried himself with the bearing of someone who had seen real combat, real war. Let me explain your current situation, Admiral. You came here with 10,000 ships. We have 47,000 in this galaxy alone. Your weapons represent the pinnacle of 30th century technology. Ours represent innovations your species won't develop for another 5,000 years, assuming you survive that long. New displays materialized around Morrison, showing tactical analyses that made Zekthor's scales itch with unease. His fleet's positions, weapon capabilities, structural weaknesses, and even individual crew assignments were laid out in perfect detail. We know the name of every Zinthri on every ship in your fleet, Morrison continued. We know their families, their home addresses, their favorite foods. We've been monitoring your communications since before you left your home system. He paused. We've been monitoring your entire empire for the past 3 centuries. The implications of this statement hit Zekthor like a physical blow. If the humans had been watching the Zinthri Empire for that long, they had known about the military buildup, the secret weapons development, the plans for conquest. They had allowed the attack to proceed despite having the capability to stop it before it started. Why? Zekthor asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Why let us attack if you knew we were coming? Morrison's expression grew somber. Because we hoped you would make a different choice. Right up until the moment your ships opened fire on civilian targets. We hoped the Zinthri Empire would remember why the truce existed in the first place. Around them, the human ships began moving in patterns that demonstrated capabilities that defied physics as Zekthor understood it. Vessels that had been thousands of kilometers away appeared instantly at new positions. Ships that had seemed solid became translucent, then solid again. The display of technological superiority was gentle but unmistakable. What happens now? Zekthor asked. That depends on you, Morrison replied. Option 1. You order your fleet to stand down, return to Zinthri space, and we escort you home for a conversation with your government about ensuring this never happens again. And option 2? Morrison's smile disappeared entirely. Option 2 is that we demonstrate why every species in this galaxy has been living safely for 3,000 years. He leaned forward slightly. I should mention that option 2 would be unfortunate for everyone involved, but it would be catastrophic specifically for you. Zekthor looked around his bridge at crew members who had served with him for decades, beings who trusted him to make decisions that would keep them alive and bring honor to their empire. The tactical displays showed the hopelessness of their situation with mathematical precision. They were outgunned, outmaneuvered, and completely at the mercy of an enemy they had catastrophically underestimated. But more than that, they had awakened something that had been quietly protecting the galaxy for millennia. The humans hadn't just been building better technology during the peace years. They had been building a civilization dedicated to preventing exactly this kind of conflict. If we return to Zinthri space, Zekthor said carefully, what guarantees do we have that you won't follow us and destroy our worlds? Morrison's expression softened. Admiral, in the 3,000 years since the truce was signed, how many worlds has humanity conquered? How many species have we subjugated? How many civilizations have we forced into submission? The answer was 0, and they both knew it. Humanity had been offered numerous opportunities for expansion and conquest over the centuries, situations where their superior technology could have been used to dominate weaker species. They had instead chosen diplomacy, trade, and cooperation. We're not conquerors, Admiral, Morrison continued. We're gardeners. We've been tending a garden called peace for 3,000 years, and we're very good at it. His tone grew firm. But we're also very good at removing weeds that threaten that garden. The choice, when viewed in those terms, was not really a choice at all. Zekthor could continue his assault and watch his entire fleet and potentially his entire empire be destroyed by forces he couldn't hope to match. Or he could accept defeat gracefully and hope that human mercy was as advanced as their technology. Commander Vashti, Zekthor said quietly, not taking his eyes off Morrison. Signal all ships to stand down. Prepare for withdrawal to Zenthry space. His second-in-command hesitated. Sir, the fleet will view this as cowardice. The fleet will view this as intelligence, Zekthor corrected. We came here to conquer a weak species. Instead, we found guardians who have been protecting the galaxy while we played at being warriors. He looked around his bridge one last time. Signal the fleet. We're going home. On the screen, Morrison nodded approvingly. A wise decision, Admiral. My ships will escort yours to the border of human space. Then, we'll arrange for proper diplomatic channels to handle the consequences of this incident. As orders went out across the Zenthry fleet, and ships began preparing for the humiliating journey home, Zekthor found himself wondering how many other species in the galaxy knew the truth about humanity's capabilities. How many potential conflicts had been quietly prevented by the mere knowledge that someone was watching, someone was prepared, someone cared enough about peace to be ready for war. The 3,000-year truce wasn't just a treaty, he realized. It was a promise that had been kept by gardeners who understood that beautiful things required constant protection. The Zenthry capital world of Zephyros Prime had not seen military ships in its skies for 3 millennia. The sight of the returning fleet, escorted by sleek human vessels that seemed to bend space around them, sent ripples of confusion and fear through the Empire's massive population centers. Citizens gathered on rooftops and balconies, pointing at the impossible spectacle of their supposedly invincible armada returning under foreign guard. In the Imperial Palace, Emperor Kethvar received the news of his fleet's failure with the kind of cold fury that had made the Zenthry Empire feared throughout the galaxy before the truce. His massive form, enhanced by ceremonial armor that had belonged to conquerors stretching back 2,000 years, dominated the throne room as Admiral Zekthor gave his report. You surrendered, the Emperor said, his voice carrying the promise of violence, without firing a shot. We fired thousands of shots, Your Imperial Majesty, Zekthor replied carefully. None of them had any effect whatsoever. Their shields absorbed our most powerful weapons as if they were gentle rain. And you believe their claims about 47,000 ships? Zekthor had been dreading this question. I observed their capabilities firsthand, Majesty. Our sensors confirmed vessel counts that exceeded our most pessimistic intelligence estimates. Moreover, their technology operates on principles our scientists don't understand. Emperor Kethvar rose from his throne, a movement that would have been intimidating under normal circumstances, but felt hollow given recent events. Perhaps our intelligence services require motivation to perform better. Before the Emperor could elaborate on what form that motivation might take, alerts began sounding throughout the palace. The massive display screens that dominated the throne room flickered to life, showing orbital sensors detecting new arrivals in the Zephyros system. 3 human ships materialized in high orbit above the capital world. Not the escort vessels that had accompanied the Zenthry fleet home, but something entirely different. These ships were larger, more elegant, and radiated power signatures that made the palace's defensive systems immediately register threat levels beyond their calculation parameters. Your Imperial Majesty, the palace communications officer announced with barely controlled panic. We're receiving a transmission request from the human vessels. They're asking to speak with you directly. Emperor Kethvar's first instinct was to refuse the communication, but the tactical displays showing his planet's complete vulnerability made such gestures of defiance feel pointless. Put them through. The main screen shifted to show not a military officer, but a woman in civilian clothing, seated in what appeared to be a comfortable study lined with books. She was older than Admiral Morrison, with silver hair and the kind of calm expression that suggested she had seen enough of life to find very little surprising. Your Imperial Majesty, she said with a slight nod that acknowledged his rank without suggesting submission. I am Secretary of State Victoria Chun of the United Earth Government. I apologize for arriving unannounced, but recent events have created a situation requiring immediate diplomatic attention. The Emperor struggled to process this development. The humans had sent a civilian diplomat to his capital world, protected by ships that could probably destroy his entire planet, and She was apologizing for the inconvenience. "What do you want?" Kethvar demanded. "I want to prevent a tragedy," Secretary Chun replied simply. "Your empire has violated the galactic truce, attacked civilian populations, and forced the revelation of capabilities that we would have preferred to keep private. These actions have consequences, and I'm here to discuss what those consequences might be." "Are you threatening the Zenthri Empire?" Chin's expression remained calm. "Your Imperial Majesty, I am offering the Zenthri Empire an opportunity to choose its own future. That opportunity won't remain available indefinitely." Around the throne room, Zek Thor and the other military advisors exchanged nervous glances. The human diplomat's tone was conversational, almost friendly, but there was an underlying firmness that suggested immovable resolve. "Explain these consequences," the Emperor said carefully. Chun activated a display that materialized in the air between them, showing a complex web of data that took several moments to interpret. When the implications became clear, Emperor Kethvar felt something cold settle in his stomach. "These are economic projections," Chun explained, showing what happens when the Zenthri Empire is removed from galactic trade networks. "As you can see, your civilization imports approximately 60% of its advanced technology, 30% of its food production capacity, and nearly all of its medical supplies from other species." The projections showed cascading failures throughout Zenthri society, technological systems breaking down without replacement parts, food shortages in the outer colonies, medical crises as sophisticated treatments became unavailable. It was a picture of slow collapse rather than dramatic destruction. "You would starve billions of people?" Kethvar asked, though his voice lacked conviction. "We wouldn't starve anyone," Chun corrected gently. "Those projections show what would happen if the galactic community decided that the Zenthri Empire was too dangerous to engage with commercially. The choice would be theirs, not ours." More data streams appeared, showing communication intercepts from across the galaxy. Species after species was expressing alarm about the Zenthri assault, demanding action from their governments, calling for economic sanctions and military cooperation agreements with humanity. "The revelation of our capabilities has had an interesting effect on galactic politics," Chun continued. "Many species are realizing that they've been living under the protection of guardians they never knew existed. They're also realizing that the Zenthri Empire represents exactly the kind of threat those guardians were prepared to handle." Emperor Kethvar looked at Admiral Zek Thor, who nodded grimly. The intelligence reports they had received during the journey home painted a picture of rapidly shifting alliances, with dozens of species either requesting formal protection agreements with humanity or implementing their own military mobilizations. "What do you propose?" the Emperor asked. Chin's expression softened slightly. "Complete disarmament of your offensive military capabilities, reparations for the damage caused to human colonies, submission to galactic monitoring of your military development, and genuine commitment to peaceful coexistence under the terms of the original truce." The terms were harsh, but not impossible. More importantly, they offered a path forward that didn't involve the complete destruction of Zenthri civilization. But they also represented the end of the empire as it had existed for millennia. No more military expansion, no more conquest, no more dreams of galactic dominance. "And if we refuse?" "Then we implement option 2, Chin replied matter-of-factly, "which involves a more direct approach to ensuring galactic peace." Before the Emperor could ask what option 2 entailed, new alerts began sounding throughout the palace. The orbital sensors were detecting additional arrivals. Not more human ships, but vessels from dozens of different species. The tactical display showed a growing fleet of allied ships, taking positions throughout the Zephyros system. "As you can observe," Chen said, "the galactic community has decided that this situation requires immediate resolution. Ships from the Zephyrian Concordat, the Caesarian Trade Union, the Andromedian Collective, and 37 other species are currently surrounding your capital world." The Emperor stared at the displays, showing his planet encircled by former friends and trading partners, all apparently united in opposition to Zenthri aggression. The Empire's centuries of careful diplomacy had evaporated in a matter of hours. "They're following your lead," Keth Var accused. "They're making their own choices," Chen corrected. "We've simply provided them with accurate information about the situation and assured them that anyone participating in collective security arrangements will have our full support." The phrase collective security arrangements carried implications that made several of the Emperor's advisors step back nervously. Humanity wasn't just offering military protection to allied species. They were building a galaxy-wide alliance dedicated to preventing exactly the kind of aggression the Zinthri had attempted. "How long do we have to decide?" the Emperor asked. Chun consulted a device that appeared in her hand. "The galactic community has expressed a preference for rapid resolution. I would suggest that a decision within the next 6 hours would demonstrate good faith and prevent the situation from escalating further." "Escalating how?" "Your Imperial Majesty," Chun said with gentle finality, "you attempted to restart galactic warfare after 3,000 years of peace. You attacked civilian populations. You violated treaties that have been the foundation of interstellar civilization for longer than most species have had space travel." Her expression grew firm. "The galaxy has decided that such behavior cannot be tolerated. The only question remaining is whether the consequences are chosen by you or imposed upon you." The throne room fell silent except for the distant sounds of alerts from orbital defense stations that were suddenly faced with the impossible task of protecting a world from the combined fleets of most of known civilization. Emperor Keth Var looked around at his advisors, seeing his own realization reflected in their faces. The Zinthri Empire had not simply failed in a military adventure. They had awakened forces that made their continued existence as an independent power dependent on the mercy of species they had long considered inferior. "If we accept these terms," the Emperor said slowly, "what guarantees do we have that you won't simply destroy us later?" Chen's smile was sad, but genuine. "Your Imperial Majesty, in the 3,000 years since the truce was signed, humanity has never betrayed a treaty, never conquered a peaceful world, never destroyed a civilization that chose cooperation over conflict." She paused. "Our record speaks for itself." It was true, and everyone in the room knew it. Humanity's history during the peace years was one of remarkable consistency. They kept their word, honored their agreements, and showed mercy to those who chose peaceful coexistence. "Admiral Zek Thor," the Emperor said quietly, "your professional assessment?" The Admiral straightened. "Majesty, continuing this conflict would result in the complete destruction of our civilization within days, possibly hours. Accepting these terms preserves our people and offers a path to future prosperity under the existing galactic order." Emperor Keth Var closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of 3,000 years of imperial history settling on his shoulders. When he opened them again, his expression carried the resignation of someone who understood that the galaxy had changed forever. "Secretary Chun," he said formally, "the Zinthri Empire accepts your terms. We request immediate negotiations to implement the necessary changes and restore our standing in the galactic community." Chen nodded approvingly. "Excellent. Diplomatic teams are standing by to begin the transition process immediately. I think you'll find that peace is far more profitable than war, and considerably more pleasant for everyone involved." As the transmission ended and the reality of their new situation settled over the throne room, Emperor Keth Var realized that the 3,000-year truce hadn't been broken after all. It had simply been reinforced by gardeners who understood that some weeds required more direct attention than others. 6 months after what historians would later call the Zinthri wake-up call, the galaxy had settled into a new equilibrium that surprised almost everyone with its stability. The great revelation of humanity's true capabilities, rather than sparking an arms race or creating widespread fear, had instead ushered in an era of unprecedented cooperation and technological advancement. Dr. Sarah Chun, the former governor of New Eden Colony who had invited the Zinthri to her barbecue during their assault, now found herself serving as director of the newly established Galactic Security Coordination Office. Her headquarters occupied a space station positioned at the intersection of major trade routes. where representatives from 47 species worked together to monitor and maintain the peace that had become even more precious now that everyone understood how fragile it truly was. The morning briefing in her office included participants from across the galaxy, their holographic forms shimmering around a conference table that existed in dozens of locations simultaneously. Admiral Morrison appeared from his flagship, Secretary Chun connected from Earth, and Ambassador Vasquez joined from the Galactic Council chambers on Nexus Prime. Status report from former Zenthri territories? Sarah asked, reviewing data streams on her personal display. Admiral Morrison consulted his notes. Remarkably positive. The transition to a defensive-only military has been completed ahead of schedule. Former Admiral Zek Thor has actually proven to be an excellent coordinator for the demilitarization process. Apparently, his experience with our technology made him very motivated to ensure compliance. This was perhaps the most surprising development of the entire crisis. Zek Thor, faced with the choice between execution for his failed invasion or cooperation with the new galactic order, had chosen cooperation with an enthusiasm that bordered on evangelical. He now served as the primary liaison between the Zenthri government and the Galactic Security Office, using his military expertise to help other species understand exactly why peaceful coexistence was preferable to the alternatives. The economic integration is proceeding well, too, Secretary Victoria Chen added. Zenthri manufacturing capabilities, redirected from military production to civilian applications, are providing advanced components for infrastructure projects throughout their region. Their former weapons facilities are now producing medical equipment and agricultural technology. Ambassador Vasquez shifted slightly in her chair. The psychological adjustment has been more challenging. Zenthri society was built around the concept of military dominance, and adapting to a role as cooperative equals has required significant cultural shifts. Sarah nodded thoughtfully. This had been expected. The Zenthri Empire had defined itself by conquest for so long that finding new sources of pride and purpose was taking time. What kind of support are we providing? Cultural exchange programs have been remarkably effective, Morrison replied. Zenthri students are studying at universities throughout human space, learning about societies built on innovation rather than conquest. Meanwhile, human educators are working with Zenthri institutions to develop new curricula focused on peaceful development. The irony was not lost on any of them. The species that had attempted to conquer humanity was now learning from human educational systems, discovering that cultures built on cooperation and creativity could achieve far more than those based on domination and fear. Speaking of cultural exchange, Secretary Chen said with a slight smile, I have reports that former Emperor Kethvar has become something of a celebrity in certain philosophical circles. This was another unexpected development. The former Zenthri Emperor, stripped of political power but allowed to retain his ceremonial titles, had discovered a passion for studying the social structures that had allowed humanity to become such effective guardians of galactic peace. His essays on the relationship between military strength and moral authority had become required reading at several prominent universities. He's scheduled to deliver a lecture series at Cambridge next month, Secretary Chen continued. The topic is why strength without wisdom leads to weakness. I understand the applications for attendance exceeded the capacity of the largest auditorium on campus. Sarah found this development particularly satisfying. The former emperor's transformation from would-be conqueror to thoughtful philosopher represented exactly the kind of change that made the difficult decisions of the past 6 months worthwhile. What about the broader galactic response? She asked. Any other species showing signs of aggressive ambitions? Ambassador Vasquez consulted her reports. Quite the opposite. The revelation of our capabilities, combined with the demonstration of how we choose to use them, has actually strengthened the cooperative frameworks that were already in place. Several species that have been maintaining significant military forces have voluntarily reduced them, choosing to invest in civilian development instead. This was the outcome that humanity had hoped for, but hadn't dared to expect. Rather than sparking fear or resentment, The demonstration of human military capabilities had reassured other species that someone was genuinely committed to protecting the peace they all valued. The Caesarian Trade Union has actually requested formal assistance with converting 3 of their military shipyards to civilian production, Morrison added. They want to focus on building exploration vessels and scientific research platforms instead of warships. And the Zephyrian Concordat has proposed expanding the existing treaty framework to include binding arbitration for trade disputes, Secretary Chen noted. They're arguing that if humanity is willing to guarantee military security, there's no reason why economic conflicts should be allowed to escalate to the point where military solutions become necessary. Sarah reviewed the data flowing across her displays, showing trade volumes, economic development indices, and social stability measurement from across the galaxy. Every metric indicated that the post-crisis period was proving to be more prosperous and peaceful than even the golden age that had preceded it. What about our own development programs? She asked. Any updates on the technology sharing initiatives? This was perhaps the most ambitious aspect of humanity's response to the crisis. Rather than hoarding the technological advantages that had made them effective guardians, they have begun a carefully managed program of sharing selected advances with allied species. Medical technology transfer is proceeding exceptionally well, Admiral Morrison reported. The regenerative healing systems we developed for military applications are being adapted for civilian hospitals throughout the galaxy. Early reports suggest we'll see significant increases in life expectancy across multiple species. Agricultural optimization protocols are showing similar success, Secretary Chen added. The techniques we developed for ensuring food security during extended military operations are helping several species achieve food independence for the first time in their histories. The technology sharing program was deliberately gradual and carefully monitored, but it represented a fundamental shift in how advanced civilizations approach their relationships with less developed societies. Rather than maintaining artificial scarcity to preserve competitive advantages, humanity was actively working to raise the baseline capabilities of all galactic species. Any resistance to these programs? Sarah asked. Ambassador Vasquez shook her head. Limited and decreasing. Some species were initially suspicious of our motives, assuming the technology sharing must include hidden costs or obligations. When they discovered that our only requirement was commitment to peaceful development, most resistance melted away. The Andromedian Collective initially worried that we were trying to create technological dependence, Morrison added. But when we provided complete technical specifications and training programs to enable independent development, they became some of our strongest supporters. Sarah smiled at this development. The Andromedians were known for their analytical approach to interspecies relations, so their endorsement carried significant weight with other species that might be considering the benefits of cooperation with humanity. What about long-term planning? She asked. Any thoughts on how we maintain this momentum? The Galactic Security Coordination Office is working on that, Secretary Chen replied. We're developing protocols for early intervention in potential conflicts, economic support systems for species undergoing difficult transitions, and expanded educational exchange programs. More importantly, Ambassador Vasquez added, we're working on institutionalizing the lessons learned for the Zenthari crisis. The goal is to create systems that can maintain peace and prosperity without requiring dramatic military demonstrations every few centuries. This was the key challenge facing the new galactic order. Humanity's intervention had been necessary and effective, but it had also been traumatic for many species. The ideal outcome would be creating structures that prevented conflicts from escalating to the point where military solutions became necessary. One more item, Admiral Morrison said, consulting a final report. We've received a request from New Eden Colony for permission to host the first annual Galactic Peace Festival. Apparently, Governor Chen's barbecue during the Zenthari assault has become something of a legend, and they want to commemorate it with a celebration of interspecies cooperation. Sarah laughed, remembering her invitation to Admiral Zek Thor to join them for potato salad while his fleet bombarded their planet. Approved. In fact, Let's make it a system-wide celebration. Invite representatives from every species, including the Zenthari. The Zenthari? Ambassador Vasquez asked with surprise. Especially the Zenthari, Sarah confirmed. They're part of this galactic community now, and they need to feel like they belong to something worth protecting rather than something they're excluded from. As the briefing concluded and the various participants signed off to return to their duties, Sarah remained in her office, looking out at the stars that had become so much brighter now that the galaxy understood how many gardeners were tending the Garden of Peace. The 3,000-year truce hadn't been shattered after all. It had been transformed into something stronger, more inclusive, and more sustainable. The Zenthari crisis had taught the galaxy that peace wasn't just the absence of war. It was an active choice that required constant cultivation, protection, and renewal. And humanity, the species that had spent 3 millennia quietly preparing for the worst while hoping for the best, had proven that the greatest strength wasn't the ability to destroy one's enemies, but the wisdom to turn them into friends. The barbecue on New Eden had been more than just a meal shared during a crisis. It had been a symbol of the kind of civilization that was worth protecting, worth nurturing, and worth sharing with anyone wise enough to put down their weapons and pick up a fork instead. As Sarah prepared to leave for the day, she received one final message that made her smile. It was from former Admiral Zek Thor, now serving as cultural liaison for Zenthari human cooperation programs. Governor Chun, the message read, "I hope this note finds you well. I wanted to inform you that I have been learning to cook human food as part of my cultural studies. I believe I have mastered the art of barbecue sauce, and I would be honored to contribute to the upcoming Peace Festival. Also, I must ask, do you have any more recipes for potato salad? It has become quite popular among my colleagues." Some victories, Sarah reflected, were measured not in ships destroyed or territories conquered, but in enemies transformed into neighbors, and neighbors transformed into friends. The 3,000-year truce had ended, but something far better had taken its place. A 3,000-year friendship that promised to be just the beginning.